hear me say that from when you typed it. But I mentioned this morning we're going to talk about the valiant vegetarian. Now, before I get into the questions, has anybody figured out who our valiant vegetarian is? You can put it in the comments. I miss Judy good. I'm glad you got the feed working. I think it's probably just the fact that I got it started late and it was having some trouble at the beginning. So hopefully we're up and running now. Anybody know who our valiant vegetarian is? That's your first question of the night. Thought that would be a little bit vague. Check something real quick, see what type of delay there is. Alright, not too bad. Make sure I'm scrolling my comments. Okay, so I do have one shoulder shrug. Don't know who the valiant vegetarian is. The word valiant, by the way, just means someone who is filled with bravery and courage. So it could be anyone. Adam and Eve, okay, they were certainly vegetarians, weren't they? That's not it, though. I guess you could say they were certainly brave as well, being placed there in the garden and being the first to do everything that mankind does. Certainly took a lot of bravery. Well, our valiant vegetarian tonight, let me go to the slides here, is Daniel. And you may recall the story when Daniel, well, I don't want to go too much because I may mess up some of our, oh no, I just gave you the first answer there. Wasn't ready there. If anybody was watching, you saw that answer pop up. I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to give away too much of the stuff. But Daniel, when he was carried away into captivity, one of the things that he was real concerned about was not wanting to eat the food that the king was giving them that might have been offered to idols. That was one of the things that God had commanded the Jews not to do, was to eat meat that had been offered to other idols. Obviously, the Jewish dietary laws restricted certain meats entirely. And he knew that the king's food would probably include some of those things that they weren't allowed to eat. And so he told the man he wanted to eat a vegetarian diet. We'll talk a little bit about that with one of the questions. So Daniel is our valiant, very vegetarian tonight. We'll talk about how heroic he was, how brave he was. Obviously, being a young man carried away into captivity required a lot of bravery. I can't imagine being taken away from your home and even out of your own country and placed into the capital of an empire, a kingdom that ruled the known world at that time, and just the difficulty that would be to adjust. All right into the questions now. We're going to be talking about Daniel, since I've gotten you thinking about who it is we're talking about. The first question is, although Daniel didn't hold the official position, what was he known as? Was Daniel known as a scribe, a prophet, or a king? Sorry, even sipping my drink there to keep my throat clear. Anybody know, one day, take a guess at what position Daniel didn't officially have? Wasn't an official title, but he was known as this. I'm guessing I've got a lag. I'm not getting any answers yet. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. All right. I see I'm coming in now. All right. Prophet. And you are correct. Prophet. Even Jesus referred to Daniel as a prophet. So I don't think you can get any higher level of assigning that title to have Jesus himself. He says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. And then he goes on from there. Is what Jesus was talking about. But yeah, Daniel, it wasn't an official title. He wasn't one of those that traveled around preaching or any of that type of thing, but he was certainly known as a prophet. His writings are prophetic, and God gave him a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom there that he captured in his book, there in the book of Daniel. All right, next question. In which of Nebuchadnezzar's 3 attacks on Jerusalem was Daniel taken as a captive to Babylon? So Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon at that time, he attacked Jerusalem 3 different times and carried people away and took them back with them to Babylon. In which of those three attacks was Daniel taken away? Was he in the first wave, the second wave, or the third wave to be taken away? And again, I try not to talk too much in between because I have a tendency to talk and not realize I'm giving away the next question and answer by rambling on. So I'll wait for some answers to come in. Which of the three waves was Daniel carried away into captivity? First, second, or third? All right. Second, third, getting lots of guesses here. All right. Correct answer is, just wait just a moment longer. The correct answer is first. And Daniel 1:1, we sees that in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. That ties back to 1 Kings. I have to look for the reference here in just a moment. Oh, I don't have that reference with me. 1 Kings 24, I believe, where it talks about, or maybe it was 2 Kings, where it talks about Nebuchadnezzar coming and taking Jehoiakim actually as well. So Daniel was part of that first wave, one of the first groups of people to be carried away into captivity. And I can't even imagine what that must have been like. But we'll see Daniel's bravery and his commitment to honor God and to follow God even in the midst of this. You know, sometimes we get frustrated with things that go on and we say, well, I've just got so much going on. I can't imagine anybody having a better excuse than Daniel to say, hey, look, God, I've got all this stuff going on. I don't have time to keep obeying your laws and to keep doing the things you told us to do. But Daniel was committed in the midst of everything happening to say, I'm going to follow what God has given me. And we see that in his life. Next question. What was Daniel's new pagan name? When he was brought into Babylon, the prince of the eunuchs there gave all of them a new name. And what was Daniel's new name? His Babylonian name, his pagan name, if you want to call it that. Was it Hadadezer, Belteshazzar, or Azur? Which of those, I'm going to try to read those again. Which of those three was Daniel's new pagan name when he got to Babylon? Alright. Some of you get distracted by all these vegetables on the screen, aren't you? All those little cherry tomatoes, and I don't know if the radishes are enticing anybody. I've never thought of radishes as being a real enticing vegetable. But the bell peppers certainly. Don't mind the cabbage. You know, that's certainly good. But those bell peppers and cherry tomatoes certainly look good. That's, I think, distracting everybody. Either that or it's just the lag, so I'm not seeing your answers for a moment. Potatoes look pretty good too. It took me a while to figure out what that was. How was it? Switch my glasses down. Alright, so what was Daniel's pagan name? You have a 33% chance of getting this right. The good news is everybody got prophet right, so everybody got that one. I didn't see anybody get the second one right, but all right. Have one vote for Hadadezer. Anybody else gonna make a vote there? All right. I don't want to wait too long because I want to hold everybody up if you're not voting, but I also don't want to go too quickly and tell you the answer before you get a chance to put it in. All right. Correct name for Daniel's pagan name, Belteshazzar. In Daniel 1:7 it says, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for giving to Daniel the name Belteshazzar. And Belteshazzar was a name that meant Bel's prince. And Bel was the second name of one of the high gods that the Babylonians worshiped named Marduk. And so he was basically giving him a name saying, this is a prince to our God. And you can imagine how offensive that would be to Daniel because he certainly was not there to serve Marduk or Bel, but that was the name given to him as his Babylonian name or his pagan name. All right, next question. Who were Daniel's three close friends? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Shobach, Meshach, and Abagtha, or Shobach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm not going to try to say those three either again. So, who were Daniel's three close friends? If you want to, you can just say for 1, 2, or 3 on that instead of trying to type all that out. I'm sure nobody wants to try to type that, especially if you're playing on your phone. I should have put numbers beside those answers. All right. For a minute there, my Facebook feed just went totally out of whack, and now I see answers from before. So, all right. I'm glad people were answering. I didn't know it. He has a vote for Azer and a vote for Belteshazzar. All right, so now everybody's saying number 1 for this one, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And if you were watching on the last slide, well, actually everybody's saying number 1, but that is the answer that goes with number 1. Ooh, typed it all the way out. All right. Good job, Carol. Did you type that on the phone? But yes, that is correct. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you were watching on the last slide when I showed that where Daniel was given his new name, you also noticed that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were given names there as well. I stopped reading before I got to that because I didn't want to give it away too much. But yeah, those were some of his close friends. And you remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from what? From the fiery furnace story, right? So they were obviously as committed to serving God and being obedient to Him as Daniel was. So, all right. Next question. How long were Daniel and his friends to be educated in the service of the king? You did type that on your phone. Nice. I bet Spellcheck had fun with that one. How long were Daniel and his friends to be educated in the service of the king? Was it 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years? You see, Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is kind of interesting because remember I mentioned Daniel's pagan name. I'm going to back up just a moment. You can still be voting on this 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. But we mentioned Daniel's pagan name, Belteshazzar. And then we were told that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were given pagan names. And yet when we recall those 3, we remember them by their pagan names. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, instead of remembering them by their Hebrew names like we do Daniel. So somehow Daniel got remembered by his Hebrew name. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got remembered by their pagan names or their Babylonian names. All right, so anyway, they were brought in and they were handpicked to be in the king's service, meaning that the prince of the eunuchs had selected them, saying these are some that have promise, and we're going to train them. First, they teach them the Chaldean language. They would teach them the sciences that they practiced at that time, and so they had a period of time that they would, educate them in order to serve the king. So, how long was that education process? 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years? All right, getting a couple of 3 years votes. Christy put a question mark after hers as if maybe that was a guess. And correct answer is 3 years. Daniel 1:5 says, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so that nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. All right, everybody got that one. 3 all the way across the board. Everybody got 3 years on that one. And that was generally considered to be about the time it would take someone to really learn the Chaldean language and to learn some of those sciences and things that were so important to the Babylonians. And so they basically handpicked these individuals and said, we're putting you through a boot camp of sorts. We're going to train you for 3 years, and we expect you then to be valuable to the king and to be advisors to him. And so that was a 3-year program that they were in. Now, this is where we get to the vegetarian part. So recall when they got to this point and Daniel said, ooh, will you serve me vegetables instead? Because Daniel knew if he just was open to whatever the king's meat was, it was going to include stuff he wasn't supposed to eat based on what God had commanded them. So he says, will you feed me pulse? Is the way he worded it. The word is used there, which just means vegetables, things that were grown. And the prince of the eunuchs says, I don't know about this. I'm responsible for you, and if you don't turn out well, I'm the one that's to blame. And so Daniel said, well, how about we do a trial run? And so how long did Daniel ask for that trial run to be served vegetables and water? And Daniel said, let's do this for a period of time, and then you compare us to the rest of the people, and you can make the determination then on whether we can continue that or not. I thought it was a brilliant move on Daniel's part, because Daniel knew that he was doing this because he felt like God wanted him to, that God didn't want him eating these other things. And he knew that if that was true, that God didn't want him to, that God could take care of the rest. So he really put God on the point here and said, okay, give us a test and see if God doesn't, answer and make us, better off than if we went with what you were wanting. And the eunuch agrees. I'm getting a couple answers here. Having to make sure, let's see, 30 days, 7 days, 30 days. Hey, you can't change your answer. Confusing me there. All right. The correct answer is 10 days. 10 days. Miss Judy said 10 days. All right. It came up right as I was saying that. Daniel 1, verses 12 and 13, he says, prove thy servants, I beseech thee. This is Daniel talking to the prince of the eunuchs there. Prove, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let us give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenances of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So basically Daniel's saying, look, 10 days, then you can decide. If you still think we're better off with your meat, then we will acquiesce, we will be obedient. But Daniel knew that if this was something God was serious about, God wanted him to continue to be obedient in his dietary laws, the things that he had given them, that God was going to make a way. Isn't that a huge amount of faith? To be able just to say, hey, just try by God. See if God doesn't make this work. All right, next question. Nebuchadnezzar called the magicians, conjurers, and Chaldeans together to decipher what? So he brought these people that he viewed as his advisors. Some of them were known as magicians or having special abilities and powers. Others as conjurers, being able to speak with the spirits or the dead or things of that nature. Others were just Chaldeans, the ones who were from that area. That would not have been Jews that were brought in. They were just other advisors to him. He brought all these people in to decipher what? His dreams, handwriting on a wall, or a scroll. And Daniel and his friends would have been a part of this since they were part of his advisors. The answers are coming in faster. Maybe we have less lag right now. I hope so. All right. Everybody says his dreams, and everybody is correct. Daniel 2:1 says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. Now, I didn't put the rest of the verses here because it was a really long passage there, but bonus points if you know what the punishment was for not being able to interpret the king's dreams. He in verse here, if it's verse 3, 4, or 5, but immediately after this passage we just read, the king tells them, if you can't do this, then here's the outcome. Anybody know what that punishment was? That's right, death. If you can't interpret these dreams, you can be put to death. And I think he said in that passage, your house will be turned into a dunghill. Basically saying, you're under pressure now. You have to be able to do it. Another interesting thing about this particular passage in Daniel 2 is when the king said that. Can you imagine being one of those people and the king has brought you in because he thinks that you have some sort of insight, some sort of ability, and he basically says, you got to interpret my dreams. If you can't do it, you can be put to death. I don't want you around if you're not able to interpret my dreams. And then so the men go on to say, okay, well, tell us what your dream is. And remember what Nebuchadnezzar's response is? He says, I don't remember it. You need to tell me what the dream is and then tell me what it meant. I can't imagine standing there going, wait a minute, you want me to tell you what it was that you dreamt and then tell you what the dream means. And as we know from the story, obviously Daniel was able to do that through the Lord's power, and really convinced Nebuchadnezzar that the God of Israel was the God that can give that insight and that wisdom. So yeah, very interesting story there in Daniel chapter 2. Now what appeared in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream? This first one that we're talking about that he had him interpret, was it a famine, an army, or a statue? What was it that appeared in Nebuchadnezzar's dream? Now, I can certainly relate to Nebuchadnezzar in terms of waking up and knowing you dreamt something but not really remembering what the dream is. But I can't imagine wanting to go, okay, now you tell me what it was that I dreamt. That's just kind of foreign to me. All right, Christy's saying famine. Carol's gonna go with famine as well. All right. For the moment, as long as I know we got some lag here. All right, the correct answer is a statue. And Daniel 2:31, thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, meaning a statue, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. As you'll recall, I'm not going to put this whole passage in there either because it's a rather long one. The statue had a bronze head or a gold head. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the metals changed as it went down. And Daniel was basically interpreting the dream, telling him that God was already declaring that the Babylonians were the ones that were ruling the world at the moment, but there were going to be other kingdoms after him, and brought it all the way down. And what I love about this passage in Daniel is as Daniel is interpreting the dream and telling what these different levels of the statue mean in terms of which other kingdoms would take over than being ruling the world at that point. At the end, he says, and then the God of heaven will establish a kingdom that shall never end. And that's the Jesus referred to as the kingdom of heaven. And the fact that we know that he is now on the throne, and he is establishing that kingdom that never ends. So I love that passage mainly because it really points to Christ. And goes ahead, and to me that was kind of the beauty of all this. We talked this morning about the fact that God has worked in our lives in the past, and he's working in our lives now, and he has a plan for our lives in the future. And when I see things like that, I'm just reminded of how much God does plan things. That sending Jesus to earth to be born and to walk this earth and to die for our sins was all part of his plan from the very beginning. And that's the kind of God that we serve. So anyway, that was the statue that appeared in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Next question. So the king was happy that Daniel could do that. Out of respect and gratitude, he promoted Daniel. What position did he promote Daniel to when Daniel told him not only what he had dreamt, but what his dream meant? Was he promoted to ruler over the eunuchs, ruler over Babylon, or ruler over the slaves? I will point out that last question, everybody went for famine, so don't feel bad if you chose famine, because it seemed like that was a consensus, even though it was wrong. I'm kind of happy some of these have turned out to be really challenging. I know a few of them maybe weren't, but some of the others I thought were really tough. We all know the stories of Daniel. We know Daniel in the lion's den. We know the fiery furnace. We even know some of these interpretation of dreams things, but it's real hard sometimes when you get into the details to remember a name or things of that nature. So this has been kind of fun. All right. What was Daniel promoted to? Ruler over the eunuchs, ruler over Babylon, or ruler over the slaves? And feel free to do 1, 2, and 3 if you want to on that as well. Any of these that are long, you can just shorten it if you want to. I forget sometimes that people are typing on devices that may not be so easy to type on when I'm making these games. Although Christian reminds me later. I couldn't type that in. All right, got to vote for ruler over the slaves. Ruler over the eunuchs, all right. Any more votes before I give away the answer? Correct answer is ruler over Babylon. That was a really tough question, wasn't it? Because obviously Nebuchadnezzar was ruler over Babylon as well as the whole Babylonian Empire. But in Daniel 2:48 it says, "Then the king made Daniel a great man, gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon." So the Nebuchadnezzar really put him in a position of power. Obviously Nebuchadnezzar was ruler over the entire empire, which would have expanded beyond Babylon and out throughout all the places that they had conquered. But to make Daniel ruler over that main city, the capital city there, really showed how much faith he had in Daniel, and after Daniel interpreting that dream. All right, who was king after Nebuchadnezzar? Who was king after Nebuchadnezzar? Belshazzar, Melzar, or Sheshbazzar? And we're basing this off the book of Daniel. I'll give you kind of the caveat here in a moment. In a way, it's kind of a trick question, but it won't affect anybody's answer. Who was king after Nebuchadnezzar? When we're in the book of Daniel and we see the stories of Daniel interacting with Nebuchadnezzar, even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego interacting with Nebuchadnezzar, we then turn to chapter 5 and we're introduced to the next ruler. Who was that? Belshazzar, Melzar, or Sheshbazzar? Some interesting names there. All right, Belshazzar. See, I thought that would really throw people off because remember Daniel's name was Belteshazzar. So that was I thought that was close enough. People would not choose it because they thought that was Daniel's name. But you are correct. Everybody got that one right. Belshazzar. He was, and we see that in Daniel 5:1. Excuse me. It says, "Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, and his wives and his concubines might drink therein." Now, I mentioned it was a little bit of a trick question. I'm going to have to look up this other name because I will probably say it wrong if I don't. I said who was king after Nebuchadnezzar. Technically, the king after Nebuchadnezzar was named Nabonidus, or Nabonidus. I'm not sure how you would say that. My Babylonian pronunciations are really poor. And so Nebuchadnezzar's, next person to rule after him was Nabonidus, which was the father of Belshazzar. But what happened was Nabonidus left Babylon and left Belshazzar in charge. So Belshazzar was really the next king over Babylon, and so that's why we see him immediately. And when Belshazzar mentions there, his father Nebuchadnezzar, he's obviously referring to his predecessor. Whether he was his grandfather, I don't know for sure. But that word father there could also mean someone who was a predecessor. And so that's the kind of the little trick part of that there is Belshazzar is not the son of Nebuchadnezzar directly. Nabonidus, if I said that name right, I probably butchered it again, was the next one to take over after Nebuchadnezzar. But he then kind of just put Belshazzar, his son, who was his son, in charge. And so that's why we see Belshazzar immediately in Daniel chapter 5. And that's where the story of Daniel picks up. Now, if you recall, Belshazzar is the one who was there having the great feast, as I mentioned in the verse we just read. He was having this great party, celebrating with all of his princes, the people who reported to him, all of his sub-rulers, if you want to, those that were in power underneath him. And he's having this great feast, and he even goes so far as to take the temple silverware, the drinking things that were captured from the temple in Jerusalem, which had been consecrated to God, which would have been holy and important, and he would have known the significance of that. That's probably why he did that, was to kind of show that, hey, we've conquered this Israel that people keep saying has the God of all gods. And so he brought those out to have that party. And so what happened, as you recall, is that's when the writing on the wall came about. And so the writing on the wall happens. Who gets called to interpret the writing on the wall? Of course, it's Daniel. By this point, they knew exactly who to go to. He was the one that they would call first in this case. But what happened to Belshazzar? You'll remember that Daniel comes in, reads the writing on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin is my best pronunciation of those words that are there. And he tells Belshazzar that, it means that you've been found in the balance, been weighed in the balance and found wanting. He says you've boasted yourself above God, and now your kingdom's going to be taken away. It's going to be given to the Medes and the Persians. But what happened to Belshazzar? As Daniel said it, exactly, the Medes and the Persians were already waiting, and they attacked that very same night, took over, defeated the Babylonians, and so people are already voting, slain. And all right, so I'll quit talking and go on. In that same night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain. I missed a word there. Oh, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. So yeah, he didn't make it past the night. So just one of those instances there of showing the hubris and pride that he had, and the consequence of it when God said, okay, enough is enough. You're not going to blaspheme me. And it's time for that next kingdom to come that had already been predicted in the dreams that Nebuchadnezzar had. That was the next level down. The head there on that statue was Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. And that next level down was the Medes and the Persians. And I think that might have been the bronze, if I'm not mistaken. I'm getting the materials incorrect there. But that was the next one. And God said, okay, it's time. We're moving in this new direction. All right. And that's all of our questions for tonight. I was thinking I had one more. So, as I was talking earlier, the thing that really all this drew out for me when I was thinking about Daniel, all the things he went through, and how, I mentioned this morning David, and how God just brought David through one thing after another. We can do the same thing with Daniel. God brought him from a position where he was being carried away as a slave to a foreign country, and then put in there and chosen to be in a position of power, to be in a position of at least advisorship, if you will, trained by the king's men and his advisors, set aside particularly for service to him. And God continues to put him in the right place at the right time and give him the right answers even when no one else could. Here, Daniel was one of those standing in front of the king when he said, if you can't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you die. And God gave him that insight at the time he needed it to be able to move to the position that God put him in. And to be in that position so that when Belshazzar was there and things were changing over, he was right there ready to answer the writing on the wall and interpret that for him. And God brought Daniel through all of this each time. That's how God works in our life. And that's just what I wanted to point back to this morning's sermon, and how God has a plan for you. He's already doing something in your life. I don't know what it is. I can't be the one to decide what he's doing for you and through you, but he wants to use you. And our job is like Daniel, to say, okay, God, I'm going to do my best to be obedient with what I know. I can imagine when Daniel was sitting there and he's brought in and said, okay, we're going to train you to be a service to the king. We're going to feed you. You're going to have a good life here. Wow, we teach you a bunch of new things. And Daniel's like, all I know is keep being obedient to God. And if that's what I'm going to do, I can't eat that you're going to offer me, so I'm going to come up with some other way to do it. And then God showed him the next step, the next step, the next step. That's the way it is for us. Just be obedient to what you know God wants you to do right now, and he'll show you the next step. He'll show you how he's using you. You'll see him at work. Like I mentioned this morning, we don't always see it at the moment God's working, but at some point we do kind of stop and go, yeah, I see God doing that now. I see what he's up to. So that's my challenge to you. Just keep letting God use you. Keep letting him work through you. And I hope you have a great week. Hope you enjoyed the game. And we will talk again next week. If I can be of any assistance to you, don't hesitate to call, instant message, get in touch with me, whatever is most convenient for you. And hope you all have a great day, and talk to you soon.